The battlefield on Thession IV looked like the end of the world. Smoke choked the sky into perpetual twilight, fires burned in wreckage that used to be buildings, and the ground was scarred with craters that suggested orbital bombardment had preceded the ground assault. Nathan Cole picked his way through the devastation with the numb efficiency of someone who'd seen too much death to process it emotionally anymore. His med scanner beeped steadily, searching for life signs among the ruins. Most signals were fading, too weak, too far gone, beyond even his well-stocked field kit's ability to help. But Nathan kept searching anyway because that's what medics did. You searched until you couldn't search anymore, and then you searched a little longer. The battle had been brief and catastrophic. Sovereignty forces, the vast alien empire that controlled hundreds of systems, had hit the human colonial installation with overwhelming firepower, ending resistance in hours. Nathan's unit had been providing emergency medical support when the assault came, and now he was one of the few survivors, staying behind while evacuation ships lifted off because there might be wounded who needed help. His scanner chirped, stronger signal, definitely alive, trapped in collapsed structure about 50 meters northwest. Nathan ran, his medical bag bouncing against his hip, combat boots finding precarious footing in the rubble. The structure had been a bunker, reinforced concrete and steel that withstood the initial bombardment but collapsed under follow-up strikes. Nathan's scanner showed the life sign underneath several tons of debris, fading slowly but not yet critical. He started digging, pulling aside chunks of concrete, his hands bloody within minutes but his focus absolute. Medic training overrode physical discomfort, exhaustion, the voice in his head suggesting this was futile and he should save himself instead. After 20 minutes of frantic excavation, he found her. An alien woman, tall even lying down, her body covered in ornate armor that was cracked and scorched from weapon impacts. Sovereignty species, Nathan's frantic brain supplied. The enemy. The beings whose forces had killed dozens of his friends hours earlier. She was unconscious, barely breathing, injuries visible even through the damaged armor. Nathan's medic training shoved aside every other consideration. Species, allegiance, the fact that her people had just devastated this colony, none of it mattered. She was wounded. He was a medic. The math was simple. He worked quickly, assessing injuries with professional efficiency. Broken ribs, probable internal bleeding, severe burns across her left side, possible spinal damage from the building collapse. Critical condition. Without treatment, she'd be dead within the hour. Nathan pulled emergency supplies from his med kit, adapting human medical equipment to work with sovereignty physiology. His scanner provided rough biological data, similar enough cardiovascular system, compatible wound treatment protocols, different blood chemistry that his universal coagulants should handle. He established IV access using a port that looked alien but functioned recognizably, pushing fluids to combat shock and blood loss. Applied regenerative gel to the worst burns, the formula designed for multi-species use lighting up with biological activity as it interfaced with her injuries. Stabilized her spine with field immobilization equipment, preventing additional damage if she woke and tried to move. She stirred during treatment, consciousness returning briefly. Her eyes opened, silver, ancient, filled with pain and confusion, and locked onto Nathan's face inches above her. She tried to speak, but Nathan gently pressed fingers to her lips. "Don't talk. You're badly hurt. I'm a medic. I'm helping you." He kept his voice calm, professional, the same tone he'd use with human patients. "You're going to be okay. Just stay still and let me work." She stared at him with an expression he couldn't interpret, shock, maybe, or disbelief. Her lips moved against his fingers, forming words he couldn't understand. Then her eyes rolled back and she lost consciousness again. Nathan continued working for what felt like hours but was probably 40 minutes. He treated every injury he could reach, stabilized what he couldn't treat, did everything his training and limited field supplies allowed. By the time he finished, she was stable, not healthy, not safe, but no longer actively dying. He set up a basic shelter in the ruins around her, using debris to create windbreak and positioning emergency blankets to preserve body heat. Left water and rations within easy reach. Checked her vitals one more time, confirming his work was holding. Then Nathan stood, looking down at the unconscious alien woman whose life he just saved, and confronted a decision that had massive implications he was too tired to fully process. He should report her location to command. She was clearly high-ranking. Her armor was too elaborate, too ornate to be standard infantry. The engravings looked ceremonial, possibly indicating command authority. She was enemy combatant, valuable intelligence asset, everything his superiors would want. But looking at her unconscious face, at the vulnerability under the warrior exterior, at the evidence of his medical care keeping her alive, Nathan couldn't bring himself to do it. She was just a person, injured and alone on a battlefield where her own forces had apparently left her behind. Whether that was intentional abandonment or simple chaos of combat didn't matter. She was suffering, and Nathan had reduced that suffering. Reporting her location felt like betrayal of the medic oath he'd taken. He pulled out medical supplies, extra bandages, pain medication, more regenerative gel, and left them beside her carefully arranged so she'd see them when she woke. Used his translator to write basic instructions in sovereignty script. You were badly injured. I treated your wounds. Use these supplies if pain increases. Rest for at least 48 hours before attempting movement. A friend. Nathan looked at her one more time, confirming she was as stable as field conditions allowed, then moved on. His scanner was already picking up other life signs. Human soldiers who needed help, civilians trapped in rubble, the endless work of battlefield medicine that didn't stop just because he'd saved one enemy combatant. He didn't know her name. Didn't know her rank or importance or role in the invasion. Didn't know that the armor he'd seen was worn only by one being in the entire sovereignty, the Empress herself, supreme ruler of 417 worlds, the single most powerful individual in known space. Didn't know that he'd just saved the life of someone who could destroy solar systems with a word, who commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands, who'd spent 4 centuries building an empire through conquest and ruthless military dominance. He just knew he'd helped someone who needed it. And for Nathan Cole, medic with the human colonial forces, that was enough. His job was healing what was broken, regardless of who it belonged to or what flag they fought under. He moved through the ruins toward the next life sign, his med kit lighter from the supplies he'd left behind. His conscience clear despite saving someone whose forces had killed people he cared about. Behind him, Empress Silvara lay unconscious in the shelter he'd built, her injuries treated by hands that should have been enemy, her life preserved by mercy she'd spent 400 years believing was weakness. She would wake in hours, find the supplies and the note, and begin processing the impossible reality that a human had found her and chosen compassion over vengeance, medical care over strategic capture, simple kindness over everything her worldview said humans should feel toward their sovereignty oppressors. It would change her, change everything, set in motion events that would reshape interspecies relations and the nature of her empire itself, but Nathan didn't know any of that. He just kept walking, his scanner searching for the next person who needed help, doing the job he'd signed up for, believing in his simple medic's philosophy that all suffering mattered and reducing it was always the right choice. Sometimes the most profound changes in galactic history start with one tired medic making the choice to help rather than hate, to heal rather than harm, to show mercy without understanding the full implications of that choice. Nathan Cole had no idea he just altered the trajectory of hundreds of worlds. He just knew someone was hurt, and he'd helped. That was enough. 3 days after treating the wounded sovereignty warrior, Nathan was still working through Thession IV's ruins when the sky went dark with ships. Not human evacuation vessels. He'd missed those, choosing to stay behind with the handful of other medics still searching for survivors. These were sovereignty warships, dozens of them, appearing in atmosphere with the kind of precision that suggested this wasn't standard post-battle cleanup. The ships deployed troops in overwhelming numbers, surrounding the medical station where Nathan and his remaining unit were operating. Sovereignty soldiers moved with the kind of discipline that meant this was planned operation rather than opportunistic assault. And within minutes, Nathan's commanding officer was trying to negotiate surrender with forces that outnumbered them 50-1. Then she walked through the sovereignty lines. Nathan recognized her instantly despite the new armor, the same distinctive features, same silver eyes, same imposing height. The woman he'd treated. The warrior he'd found broken and bleeding, and saved because that's what medics did. Except now she was wearing armor that made her previous ornate outfit look simple by comparison. Every piece was engraved with script Nathan couldn't read, but that clearly meant something because every single sovereignty soldier dropped to one knee as she passed, heads bowed, weapons lowered in precise military salute. She moved with authority that transcended rank, absolute, unquestionable, the kind of power that didn't need announcement or explanation. It simply was, and everyone in proximity acknowledged it instinctively. Nathan's commanding officer tried to negotiate, but she ignored him completely, her silver eyes scanning the assembled humans until they found Nathan standing near the medical supplies. She walked directly toward him, and the crowd parted automatically, humans stumbling aside in confusion, sovereignty soldiers creating path with choreographed precision. "You," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Nathan's translator struggle to render it in standard. "You are the medic who found me 3 days ago, who treated my injuries." It wasn't a question. Nathan nodded anyway, confused by the attention and the impossible military display focused on him specifically. "Yes, ma'am. You were badly hurt. I did what I could with field supplies. I'm glad you're recovering. Do you know who I am?" Her tone was neutral, but something in her posture suggested his answer mattered. "No, ma'am. I'm sorry, I don't. You weren't carrying identification that survived the injuries, and I was focused on keeping you alive rather than checking your credentials." Nathan tried for respectful honesty. "I assumed you were high-ranking based on your armor, but beyond that I don't know." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe or amusement. Her long ears angled forward slightly, an expression Nathan's cultural knowledge couldn't interpret. "I am Empress Silvara, eternal sovereign of the United Systems, supreme commander of the Imperial Fleet, ruler of 417 worlds." Nathan's brain short-circuited. The Empress. The actual Empress. Not just high-ranking officer, but the absolute supreme ruler of the sovereignty, the being whose decisions shaped policy across hundreds of worlds, whose military commanded billions of soldiers, who was legendary even among humans for her tactical brilliance and ruthless effectiveness. He'd saved the Empress, given her IV fluids and treated her burns and written her a note calling himself a friend. "Oh," Nathan managed, his voice coming out weak. I didn't know that. I'm sorry if protocol required." "Protocol required nothing. I was unconscious and dying." She was still studying him with intensity that made his skin crawl. "You found me wounded, enemy combatant on active battlefield where my forces had killed your fellow soldiers, and your response was to provide comprehensive medical care." "Why?" "Because you were hurt. I'm a medic. That's what I do." The answer felt inadequate even as Nathan said it. "You could have left me to die, could have reported my location to your superiors for strategic capture, could have taken revenge for the invasion that killed hundreds of humans." She listed options like she was reciting tactical alternatives. "Instead, you stabilized my life-threatening injuries, left me medical supplies with instructions, and continued searching for other wounded." "Why?" "Because letting someone die when I can help is wrong." Nathan found himself meeting those ancient silver eyes despite the fear. Species and politics don't change that. You were suffering, and I had the ability and training to reduce that suffering. Not helping would have violated everything I believe about being a medic and being human. Everything you believe about being human. She repeated the phrase like she was tasting it. Interesting. Silvara turned to address both forces, her sovereignty troops and the surrounded humans. Her voice carried authority that made everyone stand straighter. By right of imperial authority vested in my person, I declare this human, Nathan Cole, under my direct personal protection. He is granted safe passage through all sovereignty-controlled space and immunity from hostilities. Any being who harms him, regardless of species or rank, answers to me directly and personally. She turned back to Nathan's commanding officer. Release his service contract. Nathan Cole is imperial property now, claimed by right of life debt. He comes with me. Your Majesty, we can't just. The officer's protest died under her stare. You can and you will. Unless you prefer I take him by force and demonstrate why this planet's defenses lasted less than 3 hours against my assault. Her tone was perfectly pleasant. The threat was absolute. He saved my life. He's mine now. These are not negotiable terms. Nathan's commander looked at him with an expression mixing sympathy and terror, then nodded. Of course, Your Majesty. We release Medic Cole from service. Excellent. Silvara gestured to her troops. Ensure the remaining humans have medical supplies and transport to their evacuation point. No one else dies here. I've made enough corpses on this world. She turned to Nathan. Come, we're leaving. I have wounded to treat. My medical corps will handle them. You're coming with me. She started walking toward her ship, clearly expecting Nathan to follow. He did, because refusing the galaxy's most powerful warrior seemed like poor survival strategy. As he passed his unit, his fellow medics stared with expressions ranging from horror to confusion to jealousy. His commander whispered, "Good luck, Cole. Try not to start an interstellar incident." Nathan was escorted onto a sovereignty warship that made human vessels look like children's toys. All sleek lines and technology that bent physics in ways he didn't understand. Sovereignty soldiers treated him with careful respect that felt more like fear, making space as he passed, acknowledging him with nods that suggested they'd been briefed on his new status. He was shown to quarters that were larger than any space he'd occupied in his entire military career, assigned attendants who bowed and spoke in respectful tones that made him deeply uncomfortable, given access to amenities that looked like luxury hotel rather than military vessel. And through it all, Nathan kept thinking about the woman he'd treated. No, the Empress he'd treated, and wondering what exactly he'd stumbled into by choosing mercy over hate on a battlefield 3 days earlier. He'd saved the life of the galaxy's most powerful being. Now apparently, he was hers, whatever that meant. His simple medic's philosophy about reducing suffering regardless of politics had just collided with galactic power structures in ways he couldn't begin to predict. Nathan sat in his luxurious quarters and wondered if he'd made the best decision of his life or the worst mistake possible. Probably both, he decided. Definitely both. The Imperial Palace made Nathan feel like he'd stepped into a different reality. Architecture that seemed to grow rather than be built. Technology that looked like crystallized starlight. Spaces so vast and ornate that his human sense of scale kept insisting it was impossible. He was given quarters in a wing reserved for honored guests, rooms larger than his childhood home, furnished with pieces that were probably worth more than his entire unit's annual budget, attended by staff who treated him with deference that was terrifying. No one would explain what he was doing here. He was fed, clothed in garments that felt like wearing clouds, provided with entertainment systems that accessed media from hundreds of worlds. But answers, context, understanding of why the Empress had claimed him. Nothing. On his 3rd day, Silvara summoned him. The attendants dressed him in formal attire that apparently signified guest status, then escorted him through corridors that seemed to shift perspective as he walked, past guards whose armor made them look like statues of metal and menace, into chambers far from the throne room's public grandeur. The private quarters were elegant but surprisingly comfortable, more personal library than imperial chamber. Shelves held data cores and what looked like actual physical books, seating arranged for conversation rather than ceremony, windows overlooking gardens that definitely shouldn't exist in a space station, but somehow did anyway. Empress Silvara waited without the elaborate armor or imperial regalia. She wore robes that were simpler but somehow made her more imposing rather than less, and her long ears angled forward as Nathan entered. Attention, focus, interest. Sit, Nathan Cole. She gestured to furniture that adjusted automatically to his height when he approached. We should discuss your situation, and formality makes honest conversation difficult. Nathan sat, feeling ridiculous in formal attire while facing the being who'd conquered hundreds of worlds. Am I a prisoner? No, you're a guest under my protection. She poured liquid from a carafe, something that looked like wine but smelled alien and probably was. You're free to leave Imperial space if you choose, though I'd strongly prefer you didn't. I brought you here because I have questions that need answers only you can provide. What questions? I'm just a medic. I don't have classified information or strategic knowledge. I don't need information. I need understanding. She settled into her chair with grace that suggested centuries of practice. Why you saved me. Not the simple answer you gave on the battlefield, but the true reason. You're human. I'm sovereignty. Our peoples have been at war for decades. I personally commanded the assault on Thession IV that killed hundreds, possibly including soldiers you knew or cared about. And yet you found me wounded and chose mercy. Why? Nathan considered lying, giving diplomatic answer that might protect him. Then remembered this was the being who'd spent 400 years conquering through ruthless honesty of force. She'd see through deception. Because you were a person in pain, he said simply. Everything else, your species, your rank, your role in the battle, was secondary to that immediate reality. You were suffering, and I had the ability and training to reduce that suffering. Not helping would have violated everything I believe about being a medic and being human. Even knowing I'd ordered the attack that killed your comrades. Even understanding that saving me meant saving the being who commands the forces killing humans across dozens of worlds. Even then, Nathan met her eyes. Revenge wouldn't bring them back. Letting you die wouldn't change what happened. But helping you. He paused, searching for words. That was something positive I could do in the middle of horrible circumstances. A small act of mercy in a war that's been nothing but cruelty for years. Maybe that makes me naive or foolish, but I couldn't live with myself if I'd walked away. Silvara was silent for a long moment, her expression shifting through emotions Nathan couldn't read, her ears moving through complex patterns. When she spoke again, her voice carried weight that suggested the words cost something. Do you know why I'm called the Empress? She asked. Because you rule the sovereignty. Because I conquered it. She stood, moving to the window overlooking gardens. 400 years ago, I was a warrior princess with a small fleet and large ambitions. I spent 2 centuries fighting, conquering, building this empire through strength and strategy, an absolutely ruthless application of military power. I've destroyed civilizations that defied me, executed thousands who opposed my authority, made myself the single most feared being in known space through calculated brutality. She turned back to face him, power through domination, victory through overwhelming force. That's been my entire existence for 400 years. And then a human medic finds me bleeding out under rubble and treats me with gentleness I haven't experienced in centuries. Asks nothing, expects nothing, just provides care because I'm suffering. Her ears flattened slightly, vulnerability in the gesture. You treated the Empress like she's a person who matters independent of her power. Do you understand how profoundly foreign that is to me? How impossible that seemed until you did it. I just did my job, Nathan said quietly. No, you did far more than your job required. Silvara moved closer. You gave me something power can't command and conquest can't take, genuine compassion without agenda or expectation. You showed me mercy when you had every reason to choose vengeance. That's not training or duty. That's character. She sat again, close enough that Nathan could see patterns shifting across her skin. Colors he was learning meant intense emotion. I brought you here because I need to understand if your extraordinary aberration or if humans in general possess this quality. If mercy and compassion can coexist with warfare. If there's an alternative to the endless conquest and domination that's defined my entire existence. Nathan felt the weight of her attention, the implications of his answer. I'm not special. Most humans would have done the same thing, helped someone who needed help regardless of species or politics. It's called basic empathy. We're taught it from childhood. My species is taught from childhood that strength determines value, that mercy is weakness, that showing compassion to enemies invites destruction. Her voice held centuries of certainty being challenged. Your philosophy contradicts everything the sovereignty is built on, and yet you're alive. Your species survives despite showing mercy we'd consider fatal vulnerability. How? Because mercy builds something stronger than fear, Nathan said. Genuine loyalty, willing cooperation, alliances based on mutual respect rather than domination. Your empire is held together by threat of violence, right? What happens when you die? When your strength inevitably fails? Everything collapses because it was built on power rather than consent. You're suggesting I've wasted 400 years of conquest. I'm suggesting maybe there's a better way forward than there was backward. Nathan held her gaze despite the fear. You asked why I saved you. I'm asking why you needed saving. What kind of civilization leaves its Empress dying under rubble? What does that say about the loyalty fear produces versus the loyalty compassion creates? Silvara's ears flattened completely, shock, Nathan thought, or possibly anger. But when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than offended. No one has challenged me like this in centuries. Most beings either fear me too much or want my favor too much to speak honestly. I'm not afraid of you. Nathan surprised himself with the truth. I mean, I'm terrified of your power and what you could do to me, but you, the person. I'm not afraid. I've seen you bleeding and vulnerable and unconscious. Hard to maintain mystique of terrifying Empress when I've given you IV fluids and bandaged your burns. She laughed, surprised, genuine sound that suggested it was rare. Fair point. Hard to maintain imperial dignity around someone who's seen you at your most helpless. Her expression grew more serious. Stay, Nathan Cole. Stay here in the palace and teach me about mercy, about compassion, about alternatives to conquest. Show me what your human empathy looks like in practice. And if I refuse, then I return you to human space with my protection and gratitude, and I continue ruling as I have for 4 centuries. Her ears angled forward, hope mixed with resignation. But I'm asking you to stay, to give me the chance to learn from someone who embodies what I've spent lifetimes dismissing as weakness. Show me if mercy can be strength. Nathan thought about the enormity of the request. Stay in the palace of his people's greatest enemy. Attempt to teach compassion to a warrior empress who'd built an empire on ruthless conquest. Potentially influence policy that affected billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. It was insane, impossible. Everything about it screamed poor decision that would end badly. I'll stay, Nathan heard himself say, on one condition. You're not in position to make demands, but her tone was amused rather than offended. What condition? That you actually listen, not just to me, but to all the people affected by your policies. That you remember you're not just Empress but a person who can choose mercy. That you use your power to reduce suffering rather than cause it. Silvara considered, her ears cycling through complex patterns. Then she smiled, genuine warmth that transformed her face from imposing to almost human. I agree. You stay, teach me about compassion, and I work to become a ruler who deserves your strange human mercy. Deal. Deal. Nathan had no idea what he'd just agreed to. No understanding of how profoundly one medic's choice to show mercy would reshape galactic politics. He just knew someone needed help, not medical help this time, but something deeper, and he was choosing to provide it. That seemed enough. Weeks became months in the Imperial Palace, and Nathan discovered that teaching compassion to someone who'd spent 4 centuries conquering through strength was simultaneously easier and harder than expected. Easier because Silvara was genuinely curious, asking questions that probed the philosophy of mercy with the same strategic brilliance she'd applied to military conquest. Harder because centuries of ruthless behavior weren't erased by philosophical conversations. They fell into routines. Morning conversations over breakfast where Nathan described human medical ethics and she challenged every assumption. Afternoons where he observed court proceedings and she explained the strategic reasoning behind decisions that often horrified him. Evenings in her private quarters discussing everything from cultural philosophy to the nature of power itself. You're describing weakness, Silvara said during one conversation about mercy toward defeated enemies. Caring for those who opposed you makes you vulnerable to betrayal. Showing compassion invites further resistance. Or it builds genuine loyalty. Nathan had grown bolder over months of these discussions. Someone you spare becomes grateful. Someone you help becomes ally. Someone you show mercy becomes devoted in ways fear never creates. Your empire is held together by threat of violence. Mine humans, we form alliances based on mutual benefit and respect. Which system produces more stable civilization? Mine has lasted 400 years. And how many rebellions have you suppressed in that time? How many systems require constant military presence to prevent uprising? That's not stability. That's expensive occupation masquerading as peace. Her ears flattened, not anger but genuine consideration. You're suggesting mercy is more cost-effective than conquest. I'm suggesting mercy creates willing cooperation that doesn't require constant enforcement. Yes, that's more cost-effective, also more ethical, but I know you care more about practical results than moral philosophy. You're learning how to argue with me effectively. That's dangerous. You asked me to teach you about compassion. Hard to do that without challenging your assumptions. Nathan watched over months as small changes rippled through how Silvara governed. Pardons for offenses that would have been automatic executions. Resources allocated to rebuilding conquered worlds rather than pure military expansion. Peace negotiations with resistant systems instead of immediate military response. The court noticed. Advisors whispered about the Empress being influenced by the pet human. Traditionalists complained about mercy making the empire weak. But Silvara held firm, backed by 4 centuries of absolute authority and the simple fact that no one could actually stop her from trying different approach. Am I changing you? Nathan asked during a private dinner months into his stay. Or are you just humoring the human you feel indebted to? You're changing me, Silvara admitted, her ears angled with unusual vulnerability. Not because your arguments are particularly novel, many have suggested mercy and diplomacy over the centuries, but because you embody what you preach. You treated your greatest enemy with compassion when you could have chosen vengeance. That action gave your philosophy credibility that words alone never could. I'm just a medic. I'm not qualified to reshape how empires function. You're a person who chose mercy over hate when it mattered most. That's the most important qualification. She reached across the table, her hand covering his, a gesture that would shock the court if they witnessed it. Nathan Cole, you saved my life on that battlefield. But more than that, you reminded me that power isn't the only thing that matters. That mercy has value beyond strategic calculation. That treating people with dignity might be strength rather than weakness. So what happens now? You've been experimenting with compassion for months. Has it worked? Or am I just naive human who doesn't understand the realities of ruling hundreds of worlds? It's working. Her grip on his hand tightened. Rebellions are down. Cooperation is up. Systems that resisted violently for decades are negotiating peacefully. It's slow, imperfect, meeting resistance from traditionalists who think I've gone soft. But it's working better than pure conquest ever did. Then why do you look so conflicted? Because I'm learning that changing empire is easier than changing Empress. Her voice carried weight. I spent 400 years being ruthless. That doesn't disappear because one human showed me kindness. My instincts still scream for overwhelming force when problems arise. My training still suggests execution solves most political complications. You've taught me mercy, but applying it consistently requires constant effort against everything I've ever been. Nathan squeezed her hand. Then keep making that effort. Every time you choose compassion over cruelty, you're proving mercy is possible even for someone with your history. You're showing entire empire that change is achievable. That's worth the struggle. Stay with me, Silvara said suddenly. Not as curiosity or obligation or guest. Stay as partner, advisor, conscience. Her ears trembled slightly, uncertainty rarely seen on the galaxy's most powerful warrior. I need someone who sees me as person rather than Empress, who challenges my worst instincts, who reminds me that power includes knowing when not to use it. Stay, Nathan. Help me continue becoming better than I've been. Nathan considered the enormity of what she was asking. Permanent position in the imperial palace. Influence over the being who commanded hundreds of worlds. Shaping policy that affected billions. Walking away from humanity to stay with the Empress of their former enemies. I'll stay, he said. Because you're right, you need someone who will challenge you, who will remind you that every decision affects real people with real suffering, who will keep teaching you that mercy matters. Thank you. Her voice was soft, vulnerable in ways that contrasted sharply with her public persona. For saving me twice, once on the battlefield, once from myself. I'm just doing my job, healing what's broken, whether that's bodies or empire policies or warrior empresses who forgot they were people. She laughed, then pulled him close in embrace that 400 years of imperial dignity couldn't completely hide the desperation of. You're far more than medic, Nathan Cole. You're the being who taught me mercy is strength. That's a gift I can never repay. Don't repay it, pay it forward. Use your power to reduce suffering instead of cause it. That's all the payment I need. Years passed. The war between humans and sovereignty wound down through negotiated peace that treated humans as partners rather than conquered subjects. Silvara's empire shifted gradually from pure conquest towards something closer to federation, built on consent and mutual benefit rather than domination alone. It was imperfect, slow, meeting constant resistance from both sovereignty traditionalists who thought mercy was weakness and human factions who couldn't forgive centuries of conquest. But it was change, driven by an empress who'd been reminded by a medic that compassion mattered. Nathan remained in the imperial palace, his role evolving from curiosity to trusted advisor to something closer to partner. He attended policy meetings, challenged decisions he thought were too harsh, reminded Silvara when her old instincts toward ruthless efficiency were overwhelming her newer commitment to mercy. Do you regret it? Silvara asked one evening as they stood on her private terrace watching ships arrive and depart. Saving me that day. You've spent years here, dealing with court politics and diplomatic complexities, helping rebuild what was broken. Was it worth it? I saved a life, that's always worth it. Nathan took her hand, the gesture natural now after years. Besides, you've become a genuinely better ruler. The sovereignty is more just, less brutal. Billions of beings suffer less because you learned mercy. That's absolutely worth staying for. I had good teacher. her ears angled forward with affection that 4 centuries of imperial discipline couldn't hide. A human medic who treated the galaxy's most feared warrior like she was worth saving, who showed me mercy matters more than power, who taught an Empress to be a person again. You always were a person, I just reminded you. The best reminder I ever received. She pulled him close, and they stood together watching the eternal flow of imperial business. Thank you, Nathan, for seeing past the Empress to the person, for choosing compassion over everything else, for staying. Thank you for letting me, for learning, for changing, for proving that even someone who spent 400 years conquering can learn mercy. He smiled. Besides, someone has to keep you from backsliding into tyranny. You're very good at that job. I'm a medic. Healing what's broken is what I do, even when what's broken is an empire built on conquest. They stood together in comfortable silence, a human and an Empress, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin with simple choice to help rather than hate, to show mercy rather than revenge, to treat even enemies as people worth saving. Nathan had stumbled into galactic politics by being medic on a battlefield, had saved the most powerful being in known space without understanding who she was, had taught compassion to a warrior Empress through nothing more complicated than embodying his own principles, and in doing so, had helped reshape hundreds of worlds towards something closer to justice than they'd known in centuries. Not bad for a medic who just wanted to reduce suffering wherever he found it.